I was abducted from exile in Southeast Asia and secretly jailed in one of Libya's worst dungeons. But the worst torture of my life was done in Thailand at the hands of the CIA. It was March 2004. During this nightmare, my detention and rendition to Libya, I was pregnant. Shortly afterwards, I gave birth. After what the CIA did to me, my baby weighed 4 pounds. I come from a small town in Morocco. I was not a political dissident. I'd never been to Libya until the CIA flew me there, and I never meant the United States any harm. I hardly thought about the United States until I was chained to the wall in the CIA black site. Some of what they did to me in that prison was so awful I can't talk about it. They hit me in the abdomen just where the baby was. To move me, they bound me to a stretcher from head to toe like a mummy. I was sure I would shortly be killed. For the rendition flight to Libya, I was taped to a stretcher again. The tape caught the corner of my eye. It stayed that way, my eye taped open, tears streaming down my face for more than 14 hours. Shortly before I delivered, they let me go. The birth was hard. My son and I lived in fear in Libya for years. My husband was in prison until 2010 and brutally tortured. We now live in Istanbul with our family.
Reprieve was set up in a pub where we argued a lot over the name, but not about what we were trying to do. We were doing death penalty cases in the deep south of the United States, where capital punishment means then without the capital get the punishment. If you're poor like Edward Johnson, and you have no money and you're not educated, you have no right to a lawyer. And that's what we try to help them with. We expanded a lot over the years, from just a couple of people to now 35, and doing death penalty cases all over the world.
I did not kill Derek and Dwayne Mu Young, and I didn't have anything to do with their deaths way back on 16th of October 1986. My lawyer, Clive Stafford Smith, got me resentenced to life in 2002.
One of the newer areas of work at Reprieve has been our work on the death penalty in the Middle East and North Africa. In Egypt, Ibrahim Halawa was an Irish teenager who was arrested. He had been on holiday and he got caught up in some protests.
I was shocked when they kept me for 4 days. It was finally after 6 months and 2 judges that I found out they weren't joking. It's normal to be cursed, stripped naked, beaten with a bar, or put in solitary confinement or the tank. A pitch black 3.5 metre by 5.5 metre cell. They might also torture another prisoner in front of you. Of course, you never forget. Ever.
"9/11 was a seminal moment in the whole world. The first thing we were sacrificing in the war on terror were our very principles to due process and a fair trial. And it's those moments when it's most important for us to stand up, because liberty is eroded at the margins. That was why we got involved in Guantanamo from the very first.
All of the men in Guantanamo were rounded up, often for bounties. This was not because of intelligence sourcing. It was because large rewards were given to people who just named people who they thought should be sent away to Guantanamo. In
the early days, I could see nothing more futile than executions. But I began to meet prisoners in Guantanamo and prisoners who had been in all these secret prisons who had been tortured. If you torture someone, they're going to say anything. Exposing that truth to the world, that unfortunately these people had gone so far off track in terms of what the principles are that guide us in Britain and America, was really important.
All my weight was hung from the iron shackle until my hand was about to be cut off, and the blood was going down to my feet. All my body parts were shaking because of cut-off blood circulation. Although I wasn't able to see anything due to the darkness, I was able to smell and taste the blood that was falling down my throat. After the 7 days, during which I lost consciousness several times, death became all I hoped for, and desperation killed all my thoughts.
We brought the first lawsuit against Guantanamo on February the 19th, 2002, and we won against the most powerful person on earth, the President of the United States. The US Supreme Court looked at the history of America and said, finally, no. You have to give legal rights even to people we hate in Guantanamo Bay. Of the 780 people in Guantanamo Bay, we've managed to effectively exonerate 94%, 740 of them to date. It's one thing to get them out of Guantanamo, but we can't possibly just abandon them. So the Life After Guantanamo group, I think, is a desperately important part of our work, which is to try to help rehabilitate people who have been through all of this. They're not going to get any help from most of the governments where they're sent back.
Guantanamo had got a lot of public criticism. So they came up with this idea that they would just kill people extrajudicially. Let's not hold them indefinitely and then maybe kill them. Let's just take them out. We saw this increased use of lethal drones in areas where there was no declared armed conflict. In terms of global security and human rights, it's an absolute disaster. So it was very natural for Reprieve to want to work on that. What we sought to do was really debunk the myth that these drones were precise, effective. That was never true.
On March 29th, my son and several others were driving to pick up an elder to act as a witness in a land sale in a nearby village. At approximately 2 p.m., a US drone opened fire on their vehicle. 3 people were killed, including my son. 2 others were injured. The US military claimed responsibility for the attack. It alleged that the strike killed 4 terrorists. This is untrue. My son was not a member of Al-Qaeda. He was a law-abiding citizen who never thought ill of the United States. In fact, he rarely thought of the US at all. In killing him, America has robbed 3 children of their father. He was the only breadwinner in his house.
The lethal injection drug work started in 2010. I hooked onto this idea about the drugs that were used in executions in the US. We were able to trace the drugs back to the supplier, and the supplier was a driving school in Acton in London. Over the last 9 years, we've worked with over 50 global pharmaceutical companies who have all taken steps to stop their medicines from being sold to US Departments of Corrections for use in executions. The idea that their medicines would be used to torture and kill is the worst corporate branding you could have if you're a pharmaceutical company. And that has effectively closed the open market for execution drugs. Over the last few years, we've had the lowest number of executions in a quarter of a century. So our 20th anniversary is really exciting, I think. I think Reprieve is at this really interesting moment where we get to capitalize on a lot of the great things that we've done, but also expand. You know, we have a strategy that works. We have a brilliant team.
Every day when I get out of bed, I think of something new that we could be doing that we just don't have the resources to do. We desperately need funds. You can't do this incredibly important work without paying for it, and sometimes it's very, very expensive. The people we're representing are utterly powerless, and yet all of you have power.
I think Reprieve supporters, they are amazing, and it's so interesting to hear why they support Reprieve, because really it's something about the essence of what we're fighting for that they are also fighting for. Fighting for a society that treats humans right is really at the heart of why people would support Reprieve.
We're at 20 years. We've grown from a couple of people at the beginning to 35 now. There are so many problems out there. We've got to get those ideas out to change the world, and that's what we do.